Hi everyone, welcome to today's event. I'm Laura Dillon from MS Dynamics World, and we're here today for a session all about spring cleaning in Dynamics GP, decluttering to enjoy better reporting and system management. Our presenter today is John Smith with CR Group. It's great to have him here with us today. As we get started, please know that we do welcome your questions. You can feel free to enter them into the Q&A box on the right side of your screen at any time during John's presentation. And I know that he'll be leaving time at the end to answer as many of those as he can. So without any further delay, I'm going to hand things off to John to get us started.
All right, thanks very much, Laura, and welcome everyone. Thanks for taking the time to go through this session today. I expect it'll take about 30 minutes or so, just in case you've got other meetings or day-to-day items that you need to get to. Just before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. I know Laura mentioned at the beginning, please ask questions. Go ahead, submit them. We'll get to them. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll send it out to all of you over the next week so you can share it or even watch it again. And, of course, finding 30 minutes in the day is not easy, so look out for a little thank you from us in the way of a $5 Starbucks gift card that will be coming your way. As Laura mentioned, my name's John Smith. My background is 15 years almost with Corporate Renaissance Group in consulting capacity with Dynamics GP. Prior to that, I worked with GP on the client side. So sort of coming at today from both of those perspectives, and we'll go through the content as follows. But before we start, let me just talk about a little bit about Corporate Renaissance Group, just so you're aware. We were established in '89, sort of focused in management consulting, obviously a Dynamics partner and reseller, and of course, we develop our own software. Some of you may know that we do add-on products for Dynamics GP. We have an employee performance management solution called mPerform, which has a pretty big following in the Dynamics space. And we also do a lot of budgeting and costing, and specifically in the budgeting area, 3 different products tailored at sort of different levels of sophistication and size of organization. We have Rapid Start, Board, and Adaptive Insights, all of them with certified consultants who support and implement those solutions. So in terms of today's agenda, we're going to talk a little bit here about GP and how it gets messy, and that's probably not one we need to spend a lot of time on, because I'm sure that for those of you attending, you probably have that in the back of your head already, but we'll share some common reasons we've seen over the years. And I think more importantly, we're going to talk about setting up a chart of accounts so that it works and that it's effective. And it's one of the focus areas that I see continually when we talk about cleanup. We talk about COA restructuring. So we'll talk about how to clean up your reporting and account structuring. We'll talk about decluttering multiple companies or entities and how to maintain your COA for lasting freshness. So I guess in the spirit of spring cleaning, sparkling, cleanup, decluttering, and lasting freshness will be takeaways from today. How does it get so messy? Well, many of you probably know this. When we talk about GP, it seems like over time things just happen, and we go in and set up and configure these systems with lots of thought, and at the time it makes sense, and as time goes by, the organization changes, things change. So oftentimes what we see, too many GL accounts. What do we mean by too many GL accounts? Well, maybe too many accounts for the size of the business. We've done GL restructures before with organizations that have 200,000 GL accounts. We've also done restructures with organizations that have 3,000 GL accounts. So, when we say too many, it's too many relative to the reporting that's needed, or people find it cumbersome to use it, or they're confused about the chart structure, or it just seems to have exploded, or, in the case of a medical clinic I saw in Florida early on, they used mass modify every time a new doctor was hired, and they just ended up with so many accounts. Organization structure changes. For those of you who use Management Reporter, you probably are aware that organization structures change often, and I hear often that during the budgeting cycle or reforecast cycle, the structure changes, and we end up having to change the tree up in Management Reporter to suit the new structure. So, that happens and will continue to happen in most organizations. There's new integration needs. Maybe we have a new business system that we're looking at integrating, and we're starting to figure out, it would make sense if this chart of accounts was a little leaner and a little cleaner. And we sometimes see that these days when we're putting in, third-party employee expense management systems, for instance. Intercompany transactions interfering with consolidation. So, we might have multiple entities out there that have a different chart, and we think it might be easier just to consolidate this chart of accounts and have every entity sort of with the same structure. And if that's not the case, there's lots of workarounds when you try to do a consolidation. Patched reporting across multiple entities, sort of the same thing. When we talk about consolidation, when we talk about bringing different company entities together in one picture, it can be cumbersome if the chart of accounts aren't structured consistently. And of course, just that whole idea that there's multiple companies out there, and if they exist and will continue to exist, let's clean them up and make them as lean and mean as possible. Before we get started, we always talk about one sort of fundamental premise that we have, and a lot of time we call this a paradigm shift, but it's the need to balance information in the GL with the need for information in the subledger. And the paradigm shift is exactly this, is that every time we go in and look at these big COA structures, what we tend to find is that the organization's trying to do all of the reporting from the general ledger. So there's all kinds of accounts, maybe there's too many segments, and there's just everything's been loaded into the GL. In the example I gave earlier of an organization with 200,000 GL accounts, they'd actually set up GL accounts for every salesperson so they could track, sales by salesperson and commissions by salesperson in the GL. And so there was a salesperson dimension. And that maybe stands out as a wow factor, but I think there's more of this out there than you might realize. And, one of the paradigm shifts we see is that we really want to harness the reporting and a lot of the reporting capability from the subledgers, because that's where all the data exists. If we think about sales, for instance, if we look at sales order processing, we've got customer address fields, country, city. We've got, of course, the product that is sold on the invoice. We've got the frequency. We've got the cost. We've got the price. There's all kinds of reporting we can do out of that. And, from a sales report to margin report to salesperson and territory effectiveness, all of that can come from the subledger. So there's not a need to replicate all that data in the GL. Again, when we do project accounting, we often see people struggling with this concept. They say, well, we've got all these projects and cost categories and contracts sitting in project accounting. Gee, let's try to replicate them in the GL. And we always put our hand up and say, that is going to get really messy, because every time you create a new project, you're going to be creating a whole new series of GL accounts. So the message is this: let the subledgers do what they do best, and let's keep the general ledger focused on sort of financial and statutory and management reporting from a financial sort of statement perspective, if you want to think about it like that. When we get into sales analysis and purchase and payables and project and utilization and all these other things, let's harness these subledgers. Why do we clean up the GL? Why do we clean it up? Well, there's all kinds of good reasons for this, and you know these as well. Let's start with this one. Consistency of reported information across business units. We want to make sure everything's compatible, so it's easy to understand and easy to use. We know that consolidation requires common structure. We've mentioned that before. We need the ability to benchmark between different business units, areas, or entities. And for that reason, it helps to have a common structure in place so that we can do comparisons in our reporting. We want to reduce the learning curve for new employees due to commonality. So if we sit up here with multiple entities or a big organization, let's try to create a structure that people can wrap their heads around fairly easy. This will avoid errors with entries going to the wrong account and reclass entries and all this sort of stuff that we see. Let's get it right the first time. And to do that, let's make the structure nice and clean so that the learning curve is pretty simple. Reduce time spent on reconciliation. Again, just cleaning up the chart of accounts. For instance, in this one, a recent client I'm working with had 5 or 6 different accounts receivable accounts. And I said, guys, let's create one AR master account. And all the reporting you need to segregate AR, let's do that from the receivables subledger. Let's think about, customer classes and user-defined fields so that we can, at least keep the GL clean. So when we look at our total age trial balance, we don't have to look at 6 different GL accounts and spend 2 days trying to figure out why one AR account is not equaling what it should and it's in another one. Let's just have one AR control account. And it sounds very simple, but again, there's a lot of that out there. So, cleaning up the GL needs to take account of those items as well, and this will help with month-end procedures like reconciliation. I'm actually living one of these projects right now. Built-in flexibility to allow for growth. I think this is also important. It's one of the reasons why chart of account structures get clogged up. When we originally put them in place, we don't think about number sequencing and, structuring them so that if the organization grows, we can increase the number of accounts. If we add new business units, new departments, or new entities, that the structure will support that growth. And so we need to think about that as we go through this process. So once we've kind of figured out the good reasons to do this, we sort of step back and say, okay, well, what options are available for us in GP? And we like to start here with, the structure of GP. And as you know, inside that GL segment structure, you could set up as many as 10 different segments in the GL. We're never going to recommend that. I have actually worked with a client 12 years ago that had a 10-segment GL. And as you can imagine, we went through the very exercise we're talking about today because it became so cumbersome just to put an entry in. There were so many keying errors. There were so many mistakes. I mean, the number of characters maximum on those 10 segments in GP could be as many as 66. If anybody ever had to type a debit line and type in 66 characters to put in one distribution line into a journal entry, I'm telling you, they'll be so frustrated, it's crazy. What is the right number? Well, we'll talk about the right number, but it usually ends up that the safe number in GP is anywhere in the range of 3 to 5 sort of base segments. If I look at our customer base, I bet you 90% of them out there are in the 3 to 5 area. But the GL account structure also has other areas where we can capture information to help keep the number of segments at a reasonable level. And so we talk here about the account category. We talk about user-defined fields 1, 2, and 3 that are on the GL card. And we also talk about analytical accounting dimensions. So let's spend a bit of time on each of these. First of all, the COA setup, we just talked about it. But this COA account maintenance card is important, right? Because there's fields on there that matter. One of the best ones is the category field. The category for me, whenever I do management reporter training, I'm like, guys, let's think about the categories. There's 48 predefined categories out of the box with GP, but you can add to the list. You can change the names of the 48, and you can add to the list. So when we restructure the GL, we say, let's look at the desired management P&L and balance sheet that we're going to shoot out to the management team. And let's just look at how you've grouped the rows in there. Let's look at your groupings, and let's use those as the categories. Because if we do that, when we get into reporting, it's really easy for us to build reports. We grab the categories we want, and boom, we have our report. If somebody adds a new GL account in the future, guess what? They have to add that category. It's a required field. So now I have some confidence if I build my reports based on category, or some of my core reports at least based on category, that those GL accounts will be picked up automatically. So, again, category, extremely important. But also on that card at the bottom side there, you got user-defined 1, 2, 3, and 4. How have we used those in the past? Well, we've had times in the past where a business unit could sit on that. We've had times in the past where a GL account under an old structure for reference purposes is sat there if it needs to be reported on. So we can think about using those as well because they are reportable. The next one I want to talk about is analytical accounting. And analytical accounting, I think, came along in GP, seems like a GP 8 around the 2008 timeframe. And analytical accounting really changed things for GP. It changed things for the chart of account structure. It really falls out of some of the other systems that are out there, and they use a concept that says, if you look at, for instance, if you look at Dynamics AX, or if you look at NAV, Now Business Central, I guess Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations, which was AX, and Dynamics 365 Business Central, which, as you know, was and is NAV. They use a concept in there where there's one segment in the GL and it's supported by multiple dimensions. So in the GP world, we have a multiple segment GL structure, and we have, through analytical accounting, the ability to create as many tracking dimensions as we want. And so when this came along in GP version 8, we stood back and said, wow, this is a game changer for GP, because now all of a sudden, we don't have to have clients out there tracking 6 or 7 segments in the GL. They can track the core stuff in their GL segments, but they can move some of those items to analytical accounting. And so we really want to think about analytical accounting and consider it a little bit here, because it adds a whole other dimensional structure in the system. And you'll see this stuff when you log into Management Reporter. And maybe this is the best way to describe it, this image, because what's here is a bunch of different dimensions. When we get to the reporting side, it's like, well, I've got multi-dimensional reporting. I've got a class, I've got a category, I've got an account, I've got a sub-account. So the first sort of orange bubble on the left there is holding the GL segments, where on the right side, we've got the account category, which came off the GL account card. We've got user-defined field 1, that again came from that account card. We got consulting revenue by employee and XYZ, which are both analytical accounting dimensions. But guess what? The management reporter doesn't care where it came from. It doesn't care that it was on a GL segment or an analytical accounting. What it cares about is, hey, now I've got all of these different dimensions that I can report from, and sort of this powerful multidimensional framework that comes into play. So again, this is a really good way to sit back and say, well, what are we really trying to track? And then we say, well, where best would that be housed? And that sort of leads to, the next big question, which is, well, if we've thought about all these things we want to track, and we know we now need to make a GL change, where should this stuff reside? Should it sit in the COA, or should it sit in analytical accounting, or both? Here's our recommendation. We think about the chart of accounts segment as statutory financial reporting. We think 5 max is the right number. My own preference would be even lower than that, 3 or 4, but 5 max. Enough digits in each segment to allow for growth. So we don't need, if we have 10 departments and we have a department segment, we don't need 5 digits in that segment. We probably need 2 so that we can expand from 10 departments to 99. Okay, we think like that. Use financial dimensions for things that are not short-term in nature. So the key here is what should be in the COA segments is the stuff that's not going to change, right? The stuff that's going to stick over the years to come. So for instance, we're always going to have a main account or natural segment. Every accounting system has one, so right away there's one of the segments. But then if we have things like a department structure, division, business unit, product lines, projects, if that stuff exists, then we would say it should sit in the COA segments as long as it will live beyond, if it will live for a long period of time, as long as it's not short-term in nature. If it's short-term in nature, this is where analytical accounting comes in. And for analytical accounting, we would say things like trade shows. We'll track cost against them, but once we go to the trade show, we never need to track against that trade show again. Or there's a small project here. Our projects last 3 months and then they're over. They're just implementation projects and they're over. Again, that would be well suited to analytical accounting, right? It's stuff that's short-term in nature, that changes frequently. We don't want to explode the chart of accounts by sticking it in a GL segment, so we use analytical accounting for that. And it really helps broaden your management reporting capability. And I think, maybe analytical accounting doesn't get enough thought process when we look at a chart of accounts restructure. You should at least consider analytical accounting and what it can do. I think if there's one caution here I have that I bring up all the time with our clients as we go through this exercise is that for core GP budgeting, the budget wizard for Excel and the sort of GL budget function, if you're using that, works really, really well with the chart of accounts and the financial segments embedded in the chart of accounts. If you do analytical accounting and you need to budget against analytical accounting, You're probably going to need our budget import tool, but you also need to recognize that it creates sort of a second layer of budgeting, because now all of a sudden you have a GL budget that sits in the GL, and then you have this analytical accounting type budget that sits in analytical accounting. So just be careful on the AA side that you've thought through the budgeting requirements before you sort of press the button on that. Okay, so let's iron some things out now. All right, so good label at the top of the screen for spring cleaning. Here we're going to talk about sequencing, and I guess no one tells us really how to sequence a chart of accounts. If I sit back and think about, 20 years ago or whatever it was when I went through the now CPA program and we studied accounting, nowhere in that process did anybody tell us how we should structure the chart of accounts. So it seems like a basic concept, but I don't remember learning it. Maybe we did and I just don't remember it. But at any rate, here's a recommendation. We stick to this recommendation religiously, that we sequence the chart in liquidity order. 1,000's assets, 2,000 liability, 3,000 equity, 4,000 revenue, 5,000 cost of goods sold, 6,000 salary and benefits, 7,000 OPEX, 8,000 non-operating items, and 9,000 for unit accounts and other weird stuff. And I could almost rhyme that off without looking at the slide, because that's a recommendation we make every single time. Coincidentally, it does follow the structure, I think, that's in Fabricam closely, maybe not perfectly, but closely. One of the things we always deal with is, okay, revenue, cost of goods sold, 5,000, so 6, 7, 8, how do you do that? For us, we just split out salaries and benefits in the 6,000 series, because for most organizations out there, it's a huge cost. So it just made sense to say, well, if we're going to look at expense side and cost side, grab a gigantic portion of that, stick it in the 6,000 series. 7,000 for OPEX, excluding salaries and benefits, and then 8,000 non-operating items. So, it could be depreciation, foreign exchange gains and losses, gain loss on sale of assets, that sort of stuff sitting out in the 8,000 series. This will work really well. Whether that is 4 digits or 5 digits will largely depend on your organization and how big it is and how many accounts you have under that structure. And then the next thing is we also want to think about, just groupings and logical groupings that are inherent. So, one of the ways we can reduce segments is just to think about a cost center concept or a department concept that somehow by sequencing them in the same number series, they sort of implicitly identify a business unit. In this example, we could say, the 100 series departments make up G&A. The 200 series departments make up sales and marketing. And you sort of get the idea. So if I do this, I don't need an extra segment in my GL structure to tell me this is G&A and an extra segment to tell me this is sales and marketing. It's implicit in the numbering sequence we've chosen for that specific segment. And, again, this is one of the things we talk about religiously, is just keep that chart and the underlying segments clean so that, so that we don't have segments that are sort of redundant and not doing anything. And, in Management Reporter, it's very easy to say, if I wanted to run a report on G&A, I could create a column, a tree, I could create a row definition with 1 star, and that would grab everything that starts with 1 for that specific department, and I could put a label on it called G&A. It also, by the way, allows, if this was a list of departments or cost centers at the bottom part of this screen, and we had an org restructure, it becomes a lot easier to do roll-ups when all you got to do is sort of move the cost centers around and regroup them. So it just makes things easier from that perspective. So if we've got the COA straight, then I guess the other question we have to deal with is, well, what about all these entities you guys talked about at the beginning? They create problems for us too. And I guess the question is, do we have too many? And sometimes what we're seeing out there is just a proliferation of GP companies in a client situation, and that can cause all sorts of non-value-added activities simply from logging in and out of all these companies, which is time-consuming, to having to keep processes up to date on all the companies and repeated. So a client with 74 GP companies has to go in to each company and click a button to run depreciation or a foreign currency reval, and just to log in 74 times just to press the same button. Streamlined reporting is obviously more challenging. We've got a great tool with Management Reporter, but if you say with all those companies, show me a consolidated open payables listing or a consolidated aged receivables, all of a sudden you're into doing some custom work or some custom SSRS or something like that to pull it together. So, there's lots of reasons to really think through this structure. And if you want to reduce and you want to clean up your chart of accounts, then the question becomes, well, how do we do that? And so what are the tools we can use? So let's just talk briefly about some of these tools, some of the tools that can support this. When we talk about chart of accounts, we always start, of course, with Changer. As you know, Changer is the original and most used chart of accounts changing tool out there in the GP space, been around forever. Works really quickly, it's efficiently, it allows you to import your chart, your changes from Excel right into Changer. It has an audit trail of when it got changed, and importantly, it updates many third-party products when you run it. So Changer is key to the COA change. It also works outside COA. It'll allow you to, again, renumber or merge together inventory items, customer codes, vendor codes, project numbers, employee codes. It's got lots of great capability. Closely aligned with Changer when we're doing a COA restructure, we talk about Reformatter. Reformatter will allow you to expand the number of segments in your chart if it's been locked down. If you can't get to it because the number of characters has been locked and your new COA vision has an increase in the number of characters and or more segments that you just can't get to, Reformatter is the answer there. If you've chosen to implement analytical accounting, we've got some great tools in the analytical accounting area that can help out, including an analytical accounting changer product that you can use down the road if you want to merge or combine analytical accounting codes. And we've also got a history converter product on analytical accounting that will essentially map something that was stored in a GL segment to an analytical accounting code. So if you're one of those folks out there that's got this big long structure and you're like, well, that segment and that segment and that segment could go to AA, the analytical accounting history converter will allow you to move that underlying data that's stored in that GL segment. It basically maps it or copies it into analytical accounting so that you can then remove the underlying segment from the GL and not lose any history. And lastly, Company Combiner. If you're in the situation where you're thinking, well, we've got all these companies, gee, it would be nice to reduce those or combine some of them, Company Combiner can do exactly that. And it works on the premise that we pick a parent company, we have children associated with the parent, and we sort of, bring the children into the parent company without losing any of the data. So all their transactions, all their structure comes into one company. Now, some of our clients, when they use Company Combiner, will also look at the binary stream multi-entity management product, MEM, and they'll put that in place, and basically that allows them to still have one GP entity, but multiple companies within it. So, they go from, and then maybe 75 GP companies to one GP company that has 75 different companies built in it. So, again, that's something you can think about, and we'd be happy to talk more with you if you had questions on that stuff. And just as another point, CRG has other great solutions out there that can help with all enterprise needs, from award-winning mPerform, which is a really modern, up-to-date, current employee performance management system, to our costing and budgeting solutions, Rapid Start Board and Adaptive Insights. And on the costing side, we have a multi-level cost allocation product called the Cost Allocator, and a full activity-based costing product called Flex ABM. There's information on all of these solutions on our website. And at this point in time, just to stay on track, I'm just going to take a quick look and see if we have any questions out there, and we'll go ahead and answer those questions. So the first question that came in, John, to do a COA change, do I need both analytical accounting tools and Changer? The answer to that question is, it really depends on the scope of what you want to do with your COA change. You would definitely need Changer. You may need Reformatter. And you would only need an analytical accounting tool if you were in the situation where you said, I'm capturing data today in a GL segment, and I want to move it to analytical accounting so I can report on it. I want to mirror it in analytical accounting. If that was the case, you'd want to use one of our analytical accounting tools for that. Okay, another question, what's the difference between the three budgeting solutions? So Rapid Start is really a quick and easy, fast, exactly in the name, rapid budgeting tool that works for, basic multi-contributor budgeting, where board and adaptive planning are a little bit more sophisticated. Adaptive, very much a web-based product. It's 100% web-based and a multi-contributor budgeting tool that's out there. It's a big brand name in the budgeting space. Board is more a budgeting and modeling tool that allows us to really take unique organizational needs, whether it was project or maybe manufacturing costing or something to do with demand planning, and model that in a budgeting process. So all of them are great tools for specific needs and areas, and we'd be happy to discuss those with you if you have more questions. Another question that came in with Combiner, can you select which module you want to combine? So with Company Combiner, if that's the question, Company Combiner really works on the basis that we're consolidating the companies together. It works when it does the process on all of the modules that come in together. So that's really how Company Combiner works. And again, just reach out to us and we'd be happy to talk to you about your specific needs and get you some information on that. So staying in tune with our time limit, I think I'm 1 or 2 minutes over. I think we've sort of hit our limit. Folks, if you have other questions, please go ahead and ask and let us know. We'll be happy to get back to you. I appreciate everybody joining today. Certainly contact us, crg@crgroup.com. We've got lots of free trials that work on the Fabricam company at GP-add-ons on our website. And certainly watch out for our Controller's Corner videos on demand. You can check those out. We've been doing a whole series on popular things in GP, from month-end best practices to understanding workflows to management reporter tips and tricks and all these sorts of little 30-minute to 1-hour videos to help you improve your use of Dynamics GP. And I want to thank Laura for having us today, and thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thanks so much, John. That was great, and thanks for keeping it to that 30-minute window. It'll let everybody get back to their day. We'll conclude today's event there. As you leave, please be on the lookout for a brief survey that will pop up. We do really appreciate the feedback. It's just a couple of questions. It does help us at MSDW, and it helps our presenters as well. And with that, we will close out. Have a great day, everyone.